to what we said before about the things we have seen in the intelligence about their preparations for those kinds of non-kinetic, sort of low-intensity operations that they could use to their advantage.
Broadly speaking, you can't say yes or no a foundation is being laid at this point?
I think we've seen them certainly make it clear that they want to lay that foundation. I think I'd leave it at that. Yeah, Megan.
If there is any sort of invasion this week, will that affect the Secretary's schedule at all while he's in Europe?
The Secretary is leaving tomorrow morning for Brussels.
And the plan is to stay for the entire time, no matter what?
We'll have to see, obviously, how things play out. The Secretary's looking forward to his trip, looking forward to meeting with these leaders, looking forward to making clear our commitments to our NATO allies. Jim?
John, just what role is China playing in this whole Ukraine-Russian aspect? And is the Defense Secretary worried about the role they're playing?
We certainly have been watching the at least public burgeoning relationship here between Russia and China. Their February 4th joint statement certainly provided further evidence that China has decided that they're going to stand alongside Russia with respect to what's going on in Europe, and we would say that their tacit support, if you will, for Russia is deeply alarming, and frankly, even more destabilizing to the security situation in Europe. Nancy.
I had a question for you about some of the comments the president made in his interview with Lester Holt. He said in that interview that he's, quote, not told about what commanders were observing on the ground in Afghanistan. And I'm just trying to get some fidelity on that, because it would seem to me that the secretary and the chairman are tasked with communicating to the president what troops on the ground are seeing. So could you help me understand what responsibility that the secretary and the chairman have for the president not getting essential information from commanders on the ground on the final days of the war?
Nancy, what I would tell you is throughout the month of August, in fact, well before the month of August, there was a very robust, steady, frequent interagency process, decision-making process. I mean, we started thinking about and planning for non-combatant evacuation as far back as April. And we didn't do that in a vacuum. There was ample interagency discussions about that as far back as the spring and all through the summer. And the chairman and the secretary absolutely take very seriously their requirement to provide the commander-in-chief with their best advice about how to proceed forward, about how the situation is changing. And there were many, many opportunities for them to do that, both in terms of larger interagency meetings as well as private sessions that they have weekly with the president. And they've said as much in testimony. I would tell you, because I know what's prompting the question, and I would just tell you that that commanders at the tactical level absolutely were trying to make the best decisions they could in real time under incredibly difficult circumstances. And they were seeing things rightly through their prism in the moment there at the airport. There were other perspectives at a strategic level. And I would tell you that the president has a much bigger view, a larger perspective on what's going on than at the tactical level. And those discussions were happening here in Washington, D.C. And there was, certainly in the month of August, literally daily touches between the secretary and the chairman and leaders on the ground there at the airport. So the information flow was strong. But at no time did the National Security Council try to stop an evacuation or slow it down or gum up the works. The leaders on the ground certainly were working under incredible pressure and certainly, as they gave these interviews for this investigation, doing that honestly, not knowing that these documents were going to be made public, so they were very candid about what they were seeing. at the strategic level, there were different perspectives, interagency perspectives that were also factoring into the decision-making process. But there was no effort here in D.C. To slow down or stop the evacuation.
Since I'm on Afghanistan, just to follow, can you tell us what the status is on evacuating the families from the August 29th? Sorry.
That work still continues, Nancy. Obviously, not at the speed with which we are satisfied, but we haven't lost focus. We haven't diminished our strong desire to get them to safety.
It's been 6 months. Do you think it's days away, weeks away, months away?
I'd be reticent to give you an estimate. If we had total control, it would have been months ago. But I just don't have an estimate for you. I can just assure you that it's not been forgotten, and that there's a deliberate, concerted effort to do the right thing by those family members and get them to safety here in the United States. Yep. Let me go to the phones. Jeff Schogel.
Thank you. The United States is certainly taking a number of precautions that indicate it believes war is likely, including closing the embassy in Ukraine. Is there any chance that U.S. troops in Europe might be, is it possible that Europe might be part of the combat zone tax exclusion, in which troops in Europe would not pay taxes on their pay?
Jeff, the president has made clear that U.S. troops are not going to be fighting in Ukraine. The troops that we have added to the already 80,000 that are based in Europe are going to reassure our allies and our partners to deter aggression against the alliance, to conduct some joint training. So I know of no decision or no need to change the parameters of the European theater with respect to combat zone tax exclusion. Mike Brest, the Examiner.
Hi, Mr. Kirby. Thank you. How many people or how many civilians does DOD now believe were killed in the Abdullah raid?
I would tell you, when we briefed this out, we indicated that a total of 7 individuals were killed. 3 of them of the 7, of course, were Mr. Abdullah and then his lieutenant on the 2nd floor, as well as his wife, who was in fact a combatant. So of the 7 that we have talked about, we know 3 of them were combatants, and that's the estimate that we have right now. But we have certainly seen numbers higher than that. And we're not in a position to dispute those numbers because we didn't stay on site for more than 2 hours, as was the plan. And we're not going to certainly rule out the possibility that in that explosion on the 3rd floor, additional individuals, whether they were combatants or not, can't say, since that explosion happened before our troops got into the building. But it's not out of the realm of the possible that additional people could have been killed in that initial explosion and buried in the rubble, and we didn't see them. Again, we weren't on site for very long. So 7 is the number that we know of. But we do believe a sense of humility here. We don't know. We can't confirm that there weren't others that Mr. Abdullah decided to take with him when he exploded that device on the 3rd floor. Janie.
Thank you, John. President Biden said he would pursue diplomacy and deterrence in the Ukraine crisis and respond jointly with the allies. And South Korea said it supports Ukraine. My question is, what kind of military support does the U.S. want from South Korea as an ally?
That is a question for the South Korean government to answer. Should they want to assist Ukraine in a tangible way? Certainly that, I'm sure that the Ukrainians would welcome that. We've noted, and I've said before, that many of our other allies in NATO are also finding ways to support Ukraine, but excuse me, those are sovereign decisions that each nation state has to make for themselves, and I wouldn't get ahead of the South Korean government on this. Yeah. Yeah, anyway.
Thanks, John. A couple short Ukraine follow-up sort of questions. Does DoD have any air defense trainers on the ground in Ukraine?
No.
Does DoD consider a Russian movement into the Donbass a new incursion?
Yes.
And can you elaborate on what Secretary Austin's thinking was for pulling the Florida National Guard trainers out of Western Ukraine?
I think we said it quite clearly in our statement. It was an abundance of caution. Again, given the mosaic of the information that we've been getting over the course of the last 48 hours, and the information we continue to receive even as early as today, it is obviously not the safest place for them to be. And so he ordered them taken out of the country over the weekend. Again, abundance of safety and an abundance of caution here. I said, 2 weeks ago when you guys were asking me about this, if and when he believed the safety and security of those individuals was going to be at risk, he would make the decision to remove them, and he did that. Court.
There's also another small contingent of other U.S. military in the country, not just the Marines at the embassy, but there's some special forces there. Can you say that as of now, all U.S. military forces that are deployed in Ukraine have been taken out or ordered out?
I would tell you that there remains a small amount of U.S. military personnel in support of our diplomats, and they remain in the country.
The Marine security guards, is there anyone besides them, though?
I'm just going to leave the answer as I said it. Kasim?
John, Secretary Austin ordered 3,000 additional troops to Poland. What triggered that decision? You already have deployed 1,700 troops a week ago to the country. What triggered that specific decision?
We talked about this at the time. I mean, again, we continue to see a continued buildup of Russian military forces. We continue to consult with our allies, in this case in particular Poland, and it was deemed by both sides that this was a prudent measure, given what we were seeing on the ground, given what our intelligence was telling us, and given the potential need for additional capability in Poland. I would remind you that these 3,000 are still part of the 82nd Airborne. When we announced the first 1,700, I called them an element of, and I didn't rule out the fact that additional 82nd Airborne soldiers would go. The Secretary held them in reserve. He decided that now was the time to send them.
And also, we have seen U.S. F-22s arrived in United Arab Emirates. How do you think these fighters help Emiratis dealing with the Houthi missiles? Is there a plan to kind of join offensive actions against
these F-22s are going to join a range of joint coalition and allied partner combat air capabilities that are already based across the region. So they're additive to the air power that we have in the region. Jen?
Can I just go back to a question that Jim asked? I'm a little confused by your answer. Do you have evidence that China gave its tacit support to Russia during that meeting on February 4th for an invasion of Ukraine?
The statement itself reads, in our view, as tacit support. Yeah. Nobody else in the room? Yeah. Matt.
Thanks. I know you don't want to get into specific troop number estimates for the Russians.
You're right, I don't.
Okay. Guessed right. But you talked about more capabilities being brought in even over the last 24 to 48 hours.
Correct.
Last week you talked about some of those capabilities being sustainment. Can you say anything more about what these capabilities are that are continuing to flow in? Is it more of the same or more offensive capabilities?
Just broadly speaking, Matt, we've talked about the presence as providing him combined arms capabilities, right? So it's infantry, it's armor, it's artillery, it's air and missile defense, as well as offensive air. I mean, he's got a lot of combat aircraft now at his ability. He's got significant naval power inside the Black Sea, and not lost on anyone that a good chunk of those ships, at least half a dozen of them, are LSTs. They're landing ships with one purpose, and that's to put troops ashore. He's got special operations capability. He's got cyber capability. He's got ISR capability. And over the past weeks and months, he's continued to add to that. So I don't know that I would go so glibly as to say, well, it's just more of the same. But in terms of the menu of options, he continues to add to that across the whole spectrum of military capabilities. And I think I'd probably just leave it at that. And but you also talked about sustainment, and we have definitely seen in recent weeks adding logistics and sustainment capability so that it's pretty clear that if he wants to, he's going to ensure that he can keep these troops in the field for longer periods of time. And that's everything from transportation to to supply chains to medical support. So we continue to see that being added. Did that help?
Yes.
Yeah, Tony.
What steps are being taken to make sure the entire 82nd Airborne's immediate response force now that you're sending to Poland, that they're staying away from any harm's way in case if there is an invasion? Would their location be pretty much central Poland and nowhere near border?
I'll let the commander talk about where he's going to put these troops, Tony. They're going to be sent over there for a range of potential contingencies. They're multi-mission capable, as you know, and as we've talked about, if one of the contingencies if one of the needs are to help with evacuation assistance on the Polish side of the border, as people come across that border, should they come across that border and need help, they'll be prepared to do that. And if that's going to be the mission that you're going to conduct, you're going to have to be somewhere near that border, right? But again, I won't get ahead of leaders on the ground and what they're doing. But I do want to just. I know we've said this before. It's worth repeating. There's no intention, there's no plan, and there's no approval to put these troops into Ukraine. They're being sent to Poland. They're going to stay in Poland.
But there's the best laid plans, you've heard the saying, they could accidentally be drawn in. I mean, is there any?
They're not going to be accidentally drawn into Ukraine.
They're not. Okay.
No.
May I ask you, what's the level of intelligence sharing with Ukraine, between the U.S. and Ukraine? You hinted at it earlier that you're sharing broadly, but are you giving them a granular tactical intelligence?
I would tell you that we have been very transparent with our Ukrainian partners about the intelligence assessments that we've been seeing and the things that we've been seeing in that environment. And I'm comfortable and confident that it has been of a sufficient level of detail to convince. Let's put it that way. Jeff Selden, VOA.
John, thanks very much for doing this. Some questions on Russia and Ukraine. First, was the Pentagon aware that the Ukrainian president was going to post on Facebook today about Russia invading on Wednesday? And also, for weeks, you and others in the U.S. government have been sharing information about possible Russian false flag operations, how Russia could launch military action in Ukraine. Are there any indications that the warnings from your podium and others has done anything to change Russia's calculus? And if not, was it worth it? And finally, if I may, has the U.S. been asked by any allies or partners in Eastern Europe for help preparing for an influx of refugees as a result of anything Russia might do? Thanks.
Okay, there's an awful lot there, Jeff. On Mr. Zelensky's Facebook posts, I don't know whether anybody here in the building was aware of that, Jeff. I certainly wasn't, but that doesn't really say anything. I don't even have a Facebook account, but I don't know, Jeff. I mean, I can take the question to see. I would, just point out.
Their applications. And we are calling on all internet.
And we were listening to Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby talking about what's going on in Ukraine and the U.S. response there. But we want to take you over now to the White House, where Vice President Kamala Harris is discussing how the infrastructure law is providing affordable high-speed internet service to more communities. Let's listen in.
Students that you are mentoring, so thank you. Gotcha. So it is a pleasure to be here today, and I want to thank Jaleesa for really pointing out how essential the internet is and how essential it is to have an internet connection, not only for the sake of their educational success. But in so many ways, that is about understanding the full reality of a full human